So beginning in 1919, he was uh, giving a giving considerably crucial intelligence to people like the UK Prime Minister David Lloyd George, to the war ministers, which were allowing these earliest Nazi plans for the takeover of Eastern Europe to be blocked. So for a period of a few months, these Nazi schemes were going on. They were being supported by Britain with the promise that what these Nazis were doing, of course, they were not calling themselves Nazis, they were calling themselves conservatives. But the claim was that they were defeating the communist threat.
Set this all up for us from the beginning. How did Agent A12 link to the Nazis, and what do we mean by the Nazis at this point?
Sure. So Winthrop Bell was friends with people on the inside of German military intelligence during World War One. So Bell was a prisoner of war. He was a civilian. He was arrested at the outbreak of war. He went to a German prison, but by some good fortune, he liked to befriend mathematicians and physicists. He had background in that field. Those of his friends were recruited into German military intelligence. They were liberals. They supported German democracy, and they were informing Bell about how, towards the end of World War One, a group of racist nationalists took over the country, and they were fighting the war as a race war. So at the outbreak of, at the end of World War One, Winthrop Bell was released from prison. He returned to London, and there he met with the Canadian Prime Minister Robert Borden, and told him the story about the coup that had happened in Germany, led by Erich Ludendorff, who became the virtual dictator of Germany. And Ludendorff was fighting the Great War as a race war. So this was a tremendous surprise to the British leaders, who decided that he needed to be hired as an agent. At that moment, MI6 was dead broke, and so Canada fronted his salary. So Canada at that time was part of the British Empire. Winthrop Bell was a British subject. So Canada sent the money to hire Bell on as an agent. Now, at this point, there were this group, as I said, of well-established racist nationalists. They meant to have race war. Bell said for the moment they were marginalized, but they were still assembling in the shadows. In the spring of 1919 is when they become the Nazis, the National Socialists. And so Bell was giving live time reporting to MI6 about a secret meeting that happened at the Hotel Eden, which was the headquarters of the racist nationalists, where they met with representatives of the extreme left who had connections with the Soviet Union or the Russian leftists, who decided to stop fighting and join forces. Now, through this time, the right wing in Germany was pretending to the world, to the West, that they were fighting the communists, and they were in fact getting support, arms, money from Britain, but they were using that money and arms to slaughter Jews in Eastern Europe. And so Bell's intel helped Churchill to put a stop to that funding, and also actually sent Royal Navy ships to bombard some of these Nazi positions, and to send actual troops from the Baltics who helped defeat the first Nazi invasions. So there were mass slaughters of the Jews going on in Eastern Europe. Around 100,000 were massacred, but it could have turned much worse. So the New York Times in 1919 actually warned that something like 2 to 4 million Jews would die if these right-wing movements succeeded. So this was the Holocaust already going on in 1919, and through Bell's intel, which was going right to the prime minister, to Winston Churchill, to the heads of MI6, those plots were defeated for the moment. But Bell's grand final plan to utterly defeat the Nazis was blocked by an influential member of the cabinet of Britain.
So he's in Berlin in 1919, being subbed by the Canadians. What was it like for him there? I mean, what were the conditions like in Berlin after the First World War, and obviously long before the Second World War is even ramping up?
Well, so it was a curious mix of absolute desperation. So the Germans were starving to death because the Allied food blockade remained in place. So there's a mistake to think that the war ended in November 1918. Only the explosions stopped. The food blockade continued. So not enough food was getting into the country. Historians say that something like 250,000 Germans died of starvation after the war. Bell's first major effort when he arrived in Berlin in February 1918 uh, was to lift the blockade. And so his cover was a Reuters reporter. He was sending his reports at once back to Reuters. These were being published in newspapers all over the United Kingdom and throughout the world. It was also going to Parliament, to the Prime Minister, but he was describing the really horrific conditions caused by this food blockade and how that was aiding the recruitment into the terrorist militias, both on the extreme left and the extreme right. So Winthrop actually met with his one of his top sources, Albert Einstein, the physicist, who had connections inside the German government. And Einstein let Bell know that the food was literally was going to run out within days. So it was going to turn from this slow starvation to a massive immediate starvation where millions and millions were going to die. Bell's reports went out. He actually, to get this news out to Britain, he had to literally sprint through a raging internal battle. Grenades were exploding around him. He got to the telegraph office, sent this to the UK, and the wheels began to turn. And soon thereafter, the food blockade was lifted. Now, that was one side. The other side was, in the midst of all of this horror, the German people, the mass of the German people, were absolutely delighted with democracy, and they wanted to become friends with Britain. And so Bell's reports kept on describing this disconnect, that Germany desperately wanted to be friends with Britain. They wanted democracy, and yet there was this large segment of the British press who were demanding punishment of the militaristic Huns. Now, those people had escaped to neutral nations, the militaristic Huns, so to speak. They were the ones who were plotting and planning race war, but they were doing it at that moment from neutral nations like Sweden. Whereas the wrath of the victors, the victorious allies, was falling upon these people, the pro-democrats who desperately wanted friendship with Britain.
Now, he became a spy again later, didn't he, in the face of World War II? Am I right in saying he's one of the first to warn of the Holocaust?
He was one of the first to warn the Holocaust. So his warnings actually already began in 1919. So he was reporting on attacks on the Jews, murderous attacks on the Jews going on throughout Germany. And so this was a well-organized campaign throughout Germany attacking Jews. There were posters that went up throughout Germany with the simple message, "Kill the Jews." So it was clear to him that this Nazi group wanted race war. He, however, did not yet realize that this was meant to be systematic throughout the world until 1939. And so in 1939, he read Hitler's Mein Kampf in the original German. He read it along with speeches from leading Nazis. So this was not just Hitler advocating this. And what Bell decoded was a Nazi plan for worldwide racial extermination. So it would begin with the Jews. It was going to continue through the Slavs, the French, Black people, Asians. Hitler and the Nazis' plan was the literal extermination of all non-Aryan races. And Winthrop Bell's report was clear that this was going to be absolutely everywhere in the world. So according to Hitler's race paranoia, if a single drop of non-Aryan blood remained anywhere, it would eventually destroy German blood. So Bell wrote these reports in 1939. This was 2 years before the next known intel warnings came out, and it was 3 years before the next published warnings. And so Bell's warnings went to both places. They went to his secret intel contacts. They were distributed to leading government figures on the one side, and on the other side, it went to the press through a leading Canadian news weekly called Saturday Night.
It sounds like he really was the intelligence canary in a coal mine. How crucial was he in preventing the Nazis from winning the war?
Absolutely fundamental. So beginning in 1919, he was giving considerably crucial intelligence to people like the UK Prime Minister David Lloyd George, to the war ministers, which were allowing these earliest Nazi plans for the takeover of Eastern Europe to be blocked. So for a period of a few months, these Nazi schemes were going on. They were being supported by Britain with the promise that what these Nazis were doing, of course, they were not calling themselves Nazis, they were calling themselves conservatives, but the claim was that they were defeating the communist threat. And for Britain, that seemed like a good deal. They wanted to keep the communists away, and here were these right-wing nationalists who were willing to do it for cheap. So Bell revealed the lie, which caused first the shutoff of British funds to these right-wing movements, and then later in 1919, it led to actual clashes, actual battle clashes in Latvia, which significantly set these Nazi behind. So literally 2 decades behind from where they figured they could next attempt the Holocaust. But then early in 1920, Bell reported, this was again throughout newspapers in the United Kingdom, that there was this massive secret army being prepared in Germany with something like 1 million men. Winston Churchill went before Parliament with these reports and demanded an end to a policy that was bringing the armed forces of the United Kingdom down to 250,000. So if this decommissioning proceeded, it would mean that the United Kingdom would be outgunned 4-1. And so this was the surprising beginning of rearmament. So all along through this Nazi rise to power, the British alone were nervous about this threat. Now, all through this time, Hitler was proclaiming to the world that he was a peaceful man. He just wanted to stop Germans from being bullied. He wanted friendship with his neighbors. And the surprising historical fact is that the world bought it except for Britain. So during the Munich Olympics, other teams were going by, including the French team. They were stiff arms saluting Hitler. And why not? Hitler was saying he wanted friendship with the French. The United Kingdom refused to salute him. And at Munich, at the Munich conference, they were the first to draw a line in the sand and dare Hitler to cross it. And that was the moment where Hitler transformed from pretending he was a pacifist to becoming openly belligerent. So I make the point in the book that was Winthrop Bell's intel at work, and it convinced leading people, the heads of MI6, including Stuart Menzies, the wartime head of MI6, people up to the prime minister, were aware of this threat. And while it didn't completely defeat them, and this owed to Lloyd George's grand unified government, during in the aftermath of World War I, he didn't have control over all the moving parts, and there were people who could veto what he wanted. So even though Bell's grand strategy to utterly destroy the Nazis in 1919 did not come to pass, the people that he warned, and these were very powerful and prominent figures in Britain, were able to keep their eyes on the Nazis and to stay one step ahead of them.
Yeah,
and then another
fascinating
story that
stuff.
my book.
Sorry, Jason. I could talk about this forever, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap you up. It is absolutely fascinating stuff and such a different perspective